Hey BoLS fans, AdamHarry back again with another BoLS Retro Corner review. If you haven't guessed by now, today I'm going over 2nd edition Warhammer 40k. That's what these 3 books are. They are the rule book, the Wargear book, and the Codex Imperialis. This is the kind of the list book. So, and it's the Codex for everything. So I'm just gonna let this soak in for a bit, just because how awesome these covers were back in the day. Yeah, I spent a lot of time as a kid reading through these books, reading stats, reading fluff, reading just everything I could about the Warhammer 40k universe, getting wrapped up and absorbed in the Warhammer game. So I got a lot of love for these books. As you can see here, this rule book in particular is pretty worn through. It's been flipped through multiple times, and the Wargear and everything like that. So in this retro, I'm not going to go through each and every page almost like I typically do. I'm going to flip through some key sections and show off some other things, but I'll try to keep it quick. I know these tend to get a little bit long, especially when we travel through Nostalgia Land in the BoLS Time Machine. So that said, I'm going to start with the rulebook, and then we'll jump into the other 2. So with that said, let's get started. Alright, here we have the rulebook. We have the quick reference guide on the back, which when you played, you probably used this until you had these charts memorized like I did. Originally by Rick Priestley and Andy Chambers, and just thank you too if you're watching. Really appreciate it for all the hard work and blood, sweat, and tears you guys poured into this universe. So yeah, it is 96 pages, not 100 pages. But it's the full rules, everything. It's not color, not all the way through. There is some color, but not full color. This is back in the day, so just gonna go through it real quick. They had everything from assembling the models to how the dice work, tape measures, starting a basic starting of the game, deployment zones, pretty much everything in the game. There was only one deployment zone, so and it was 24 inches across and 12 inches from a table edge, and you played on a 6x4, and that was that. You roll off for terrain. You had a strategy rating each side. You roll a d6 and add your strategy rating to determine who got to go first and all that fun stuff. It talks about the characteristics, which this chart has not changed in many editions. They did have a movement characteristics, which they have since dropped, but everything else has pretty much stayed in the game, in the same thing in the game for a very long time. The movement characteristic, as you know, got shifted over to the unit types and unit descriptions in later editions, but early on it was a part of the game. Most things moved 4 inches, and that was that. So unless you're a vehicle. So talks about squad coherency. These diagrams got used and reused over and over again, and then we get right into cavalry. Was a little bit different, but then we get into the turn sequence, all the different movement. And again, most infantry moved 4, but there were specific racial movement modifiers. For instance, Eldar got to move 5 inches instead of 4. Squats were in the game, and they only moved 3 inches. Ogryn and Gene Stealers moved to 6 because, well, Ogryns were big and moved fast, and Gene Stealers were just fast. So then how the movement worked: charging, obstacles, hiding. Overwatch was different in this game, but that's coming up later. That's the original, holy crap, Tyranid warrior fighting a bunch of, I believe those were striking scorpions. So pretty crazy. Talks about the shooting and how that works. Arc of fire was 90 degrees, so that's something I definitely wanted to call out. And it was a front arc, so it had to be 90 degrees, and it was not a 360 line of sight like it is the current edition. So facing mattered. So that's not a new thing. Splitting fire, you could do that. So yeah, split fire was, yeah, there you go, splitting fire. These 3 could fire at these guys, these 2 could fire at those guys. It's kind of interesting. A lot of 2nd edition, it was again coming from Warhammer Rogue Trader, where you had basically a very heavy RPG style game. 2nd edition kind of carried on that RPG thing where models, individual models in a unit, can function kind of independent of other models in the unit. They still had to maintain squad coherency, but things like splitting fire, if a model had line of sight to one thing, he could shoot at it. If you're in close combat, as we'll see, it was done on a model per model basis, not a unit per unit. So that's why games took so long for 2nd edition, or you just played smaller games. That was another option. Then we have the classic damage chart. Save modifiers were also in the game. Of course, you could get saves on a 2d6, so other things like that. Yeah, hand-to-hand combat, how that worked, removing casualties. Yeah, just scatter grenades, Overwatch shooting. Oh man. Okay, so hand-to-hand, this was a lot different. So I want to walk through this real fast because it was very different. So when a model's most combats will be one-on-one, which means one of your models engage against one of your enemy models. These combatants are worked out and is shown below. Multiple combats are worked out slightly differently and described later. So again, it was mostly one-on-one combats. You would throw the attack dice. Both players would roll a d6. A number of d6s equal to their model's attack characteristics. So a Marine, 1 attack, an Orc, 1 attack, or whatever. Workout combat score. Each player picks the single highest scoring die and adds a model's weapon skill to the score, and then adds any other combat score modifiers as shown on the combat chart on the over the page. The sum of these scores is called the combat score. So, Marine, weapon skill 4, you roll a die. If you rolled a 6, you're no other modifiers. Your combat score was a 10. And again, if you're a weapon skill 3 guardsman, you're fighting Marine. Same deal. If you roll a 6, your combat score was a 9. It was interesting. So we have a combat score. What do we do now? Player who has the highest total combat score wins the combat. In case of a tie, the model with the higher initiative wins the combat. If there is still a tie, the combat is a standoff. So it was interesting because you could possibly roll a ton of attack die if you had a multiple combat going on, where basically each additional guy rolled an extra attack. So it could get pretty nuts with multiple combats. But anyway, forget I talked about that. We'll get into that later. Okay, so compare the combat scores of both combatants. The difference between their combat scores is the number of times the winner has hit the loser. If you won the combat on a tie, you still cause 1 hit. So again, combat scores 10 versus 9. Or say the Marine fought the guardsman and he's got a combat score of 10 and the guardsman rolled poorly and has a combat score of 5. So that means the Marine hit the guy 5 times. Then you throw the damage. For each hit score, the attacker rolls a d6 on the damage chart, determines whether it hits. They use a strength characteristic of either model for any pistol or close combat weapons. So you're rolling, again, strength versus toughness, and then saving throw. Models that are wearing armor attempt to avoid the damage. You roll your saving throw like normal. So it's pretty crazy. It doesn't sound that big a difference, but there was no comparing weapon skills, and the number of attacks you had just added more dice to the pool to your combat score. So it was very different. The parry rule basically is if you had a sword, you had the option to do a parry, which forced you got to force your opponent to re-roll one of their dice, which usually was forcing them to re-roll a 6. So yeah, fumble and critical hit rule. If you roll 1s, those are fumbled attack dice are handed over to the other player, who adds +1 to his own combat score. So there was crazy stuff, crazy modifiers. That's why close combat took such a long time. Close combat modifiers, the different saving throws, multiple combats. This is what was crazy. If the outnumbered model survives, he must then fight the next attacker chosen by the opposing player. But this time, the enemy model rolls 1 extra attack dice and adds 1 to his combat score, +1 to the combat score. Should the outnumbered model survive again, he must fight 3rd, 4th, and ongoing. So that was the crazy part. It basically, if you had a squad of Marines go up against a squad of, say like you had 5 Marines and they got charged by 30 Orcs, you resolve combat, and you would have an individual model, again, one-on-one, and then you'd have 1 fight and resolve that. And then whoever won would fight the next guy and resolve that. And it could just keep going. If one Marine kept winning against these Orcs, the Orcs would just keep adding dice to their attack roll and adding a +1 to their combat result, eventually overwhelming whoever and taking them out of the fight. So if they didn't make their saves, that said. That's why I believe I covered this in the Ultramarines Codex, or Space Marine Codex, really. Magnus Calgar had the flip side of that rule. So instead of the other guy getting the +1 die and +1 to their score, Calgar got the bonus. So he loved fighting big mobs of guys. Anyway, going through all that hand-to-hand combat again. They talk through that example, breaking and rallying, and then how that all worked with just the leadership checks. Kind of familiar with all that. We get into the heavy metal paint jobs, and these are the paint jobs of the heavy metal team that I thought that I would never be able to do as a kid, and just remember looking at these pages thinking how awesome they were and how the models looked amazing, and I wanted to paint like that one day. And you know what? It still hasn't changed. The models have gotten better. These paint jobs are classic though, and they set the tone and set the look of 40K forever for me. So that's a Dark Angel Space Marine bike. I want to point this out. This is a Dark Angel bike, not a Raven Wing, and they are not painted black, and they do not have the covered thing, and the gunner is firing a bolter as well as manning. I guess it's a multi-melta. So there you have it. Dark Angel's bike, not a Raven Wing bike. Here's a shot of the of a battle between some Blood Angels and Orcs, and you can see that's a battle wagon with with Ghazghkull himself riding in. So that's the crazy part. The battle wagon had a cool rule where if the Orc player could stack as many models as he could fit in the battle, or she could fit in the battle wagon, and any models that fell off would take a strength hit based on how high up the model was when it fell. So, and that was a legit rule. So, if you want to talk silly rules, Warhammer had, second edition had quite a few. Other stuff, these are the classic Tyranids. I love these models. They just look so alien. And they're fighting some Eldar here, and there's some Blood Angels helping out. So Eldar and Blood Angel Space Marines join forces to fight a Tyranid horde across the ruins of a devastated colony. Those guys in the back there, you can see me have a Genestealer Magus. And is the Patriarch in this picture? No, the Patriarch is not in there. But you have the hybrid Genestealers all over the place. You have got a Carnifex down here. These weird looking dudes, those are all Tyranid warriors. That's what they originally look like. The big, weird, turkey-headed dudes. So, yeah, pretty cool stuff. We have more heavy metal paint jobs. Imperial Inquisitor, that's right, and Terminator armor. Nurgle Plague Marine, Dark Angel's Captain. A lot more color than just Dark Angel's green. We have the Eldar Warwalker, and again, Ghazghkull Thraka, and Makari the Gretchen. That was his little buddy, and that was his unique Ghazghkull banner. He doesn't have a crazy power claw, but he looks like a Attila the Hun inspired guy with his crazy custom shooter and a power sword. And then we have Wolfguard Terminators down there at the bottom. So there's a squat for those of you who have never seen a squat. And I'm not talking the workout thing, I'm talking about the Space Dwarves. It's a squat heavy weapon bike, 2nd edition. That was like the last time we got to see the squats. They were the weird Space Dwarf bikers. Yeah, maybe they'll come back one day. Yeah, right. Moving on, Space Marine Captain. Maybe a Dark Angel, maybe not. Not sure, not listed. But then just a ton of cool stuff. Moving on here. Yeah, lots of cool stuff. Is that a scout? Oh yeah, there's a scout sergeant. Point him out real fast. So the scouts looked a little different in 2nd edition. Can zoom in there. So he's got like this weird power armor, but still has the shoulder pads. And I don't know if this book has any of the other scouts with the mohawks in it, but if I see any, I will definitely call them out. But maybe one of the other books has it. So I keep going here. Here's all the dreadnoughts. Notice that these are all on square bases. So remember that, kids. They got swapped over to round bases, not the first time. That's the old school Chaos Dreadnought. That's the old school Blood Angel Space Marine Dreadnought. That's a Carnifex on a big square base, and that's a Space Orc Dreadnought. Pretty nuts looking. And then there's some Banshees and Fire Dragons fighting Blood Angels there. So moving on, we got the old school Jet Speeder, Land Speeder right there. Tyranid Warriors, old school Striking Scorpions. Everything had banners in this game back in the day. They all had the same pose too, with one arm raised and one arm pointing a gun or whatever. They were not very dynamic models, but at the time they were some of the coolest things out there, and they really look good on the tabletop. We have a Space Wolf Rune Priest with Cyber Raven, aka Null Stormcaller. That's the original model there. And then a Blood Angel Space Marine Librarian. And there's the Gene Stealer Magus. So it's just a ton of cool old models. But I'm kind of glad they redid some of these guys. These sculpts. You want to talk about static sculpts. Anyway, Ragnar Blackmane with blonde hair. That's right. Blackmane. Not so black in the mane right now. He has blonde hair. So maybe he dyed it. I don't know. But he's the captain of Space Marine, of the Space Wolf chapter of the Space Marines. So this is back before really the Space Wolf Codex came out, and they kind of talked about him in more detail. So we have Commissar Yarrick with the Power Claw from the second War of Armageddon, I believe, where he with his hand claw there from the orcs. And then we have all these guys. So yes, custom battle wagon. That was, yeah, somebody built that. Psychology. The leadership checks actually mattered. So there was fear, terror, stupidity, frenzy, hatred, all the things that were in the game in second, and also in Warhammer Fantasy at the time, and then slowly got phased out and brought back. So fear checks and things like that. Talk about the characteristics and how those all worked. Warrior cards, how to use those. Psionics and Psychers, which was a different thing altogether. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this book. I'm just going to flip through the rest of it here. More hand-to-hand combat, special rules, special vehicle rules, bikes and trikes and stuff like that. So yeah, that's this book. So we pause real quick. I'll grab the next one, which will be the Wargear book, and we'll run through that one fairly quickly because this is already getting pretty long. Alright, here we have the Warhammer 2nd edition Wargear book. I could have done a retro on this book by itself, but I wanted to show it all off. This shows off all the weapons in the Warhammer universe. There's a couple weapons that were in Codex specific things, but for the most part, if it was in a book or in an army, it was in this book. It pretty much covers everything. All of the equipment detailed in this book had lovingly written sections about how each weapon worked, very graphically detailed in some cases, like the Harlequin Kiss, where it liquefies the insides. Just all that fun stuff. I spent hours as a kid going through this book in particular, looking at all the pictures, reading about the weapon descriptions, reading about how they worked and how gory, and just letting my brain kind of work its thing. Letting the imagination take over. So I loved this book. But it details basically the range of the weapons, any pluses to hit or minuses to hit, short and long range, the strength of the weapon, how much damage it did per wound or per hit caused. So some weapons cause D3 or 1 wound or 1, and those are all affected armor saves. The save modifiers, and then the armor penetration when using against vehicle, and then any special rules. So pretty cool stuff. The Harlequin Kit, this is what I was talking about. There's all of the nasty stuff that this thing did, where it would monofilament, they'd punch in with the thing and it would spindle out and buzzsaw you in from the inside. It was pretty gross. All that cool stuff. So I loved all the pictures, loved all the power weapon descriptions. The Thunder Hammer was another dirty one. Close combat, had special rules, had a whole special rules section. It's no strength value because it's not required. When the hammer hits a target, it will automatically cause damage, barring the effects of armor. So if you could survive a -5 save modifier, you actually got to roll to die. The normal damage roll against target's toughness is ignored. In the case of vehicles, their armor hull is automatically penetrated by the blow. So Thunderhammers were pretty darn mean, and they did D6 damage. So it's pretty much auto fail if you hit anything. It was automatic penetration, and you automatically failed armor checks, and it was pretty cool. Get into all the different pistols. That's the Scout right there with the Mohawk. His own special Scout armor. Last pistol, needle pistol, shuriken pistol, all this stuff. The stub gun, which is like a 9mm or something like that, maybe a 45. The Gene Stealer Cult picture, love that one. Get into the auto gun, which was favored by the Gretchen. We had the bolt gun, which was favored by Space Marines. There's las guns later on. Again, Imperial Guard weapons. The Flamer, how those all worked. I just want to find the cool pictures. The flesh borers that the Tyranids use have changed a lot over time, but that's one of the original pictures there. Las guns had this weird They just look weird. Melt-A-Guns, they were long-range microwaves, really. Works by sub-molecule thermal agitator, just a microwave. The Ogren Ripper gun, which was at the time pretty sweet. It was a Tommy gun, but it basically used shotgun shells, and kind of like the AA-12 modern combat shotgun, but this has got the big drum magazine, and it fired shotgun shells. But it was pretty cool. Short range, if you were within 6 inches, this thing always hit because, again, just the spray of bullets, boom, boom, boom. So pretty crazy. Needler sniper rifle. We have a quick story there. Then we get into grenade launchers and plasma guns and the shotgun, and just all these really cool pictures. It was really easy to get sucked in. The Stormbolter, which was pretty nuts. It rolled a sustained fire die, which that was a cool thing in second. It was also could be super frustrating because of the jam dice. If you've ever had 3 jams on your assault cannon, you know what I'm talking about, where it would blow up on you and probably kill the wielder. Then we get into the heavy weapons. That's the assault cannon right there. If you roll 3 jams together and sustained fire dice, expose, instantly killing the user with no armor save possible. So, ouch. Autocannon, these are all shoulder mounted too. That was the cool part. Way back in the day, all of the heavy weapons, and aside from Terminator heavy weapons, were shoulder mounted. Heavy Weber, las cannon, multi-melta. Yeah, you want to talk about melting vehicles. Just all the crazy stuff. The Cyclone Terminator missile, that thing was nuts. It had so many special rules. You could do just crazy things with it. Battle cannons, conversion beam projector. We have D cannons on anti-grav platforms, Eldar specific stuff. Rapier laser destroyers, mole mortars. That thing was nuts. Just the way it could go through stuff. It had so many special rules. I mean, it's a page of rules for this super heavy weapon, basically. You different firing modes. You had airburst, surface, and ground, and subterranean. Did different damages, different radiuses when they exploded. Different strengths and all that stuff. It's pretty crazy. Thud guns. Oh man, you want to talk about wasting some time. You actually had to roll a couple of different dice. There was second edition used of almost a full polyhedral set of dice. So you needed D6s, in some cases D4s. You needed D8s, D12s, and for armor penetration, sometimes you even needed a D20. So luckily, you only needed like one set, and then a bunch of extra D6s for other things. So all the different grenades, hallucinogen grenades effect table. You roll a D10. Just crazy stuff that was happening. GW love their charts. We have all the different types of more grenades, so photon flash grenades, plasma grenades, how they all worked, how plasma was a dying star. It was crazy. Scare grenades, Tanglefoot. You could create grenades that would slow people down. We jump through the armor and shield section here. There was a lot more armor than just a 3-up, 4-up, 5-up, armor saves back in the day. They had way more descriptions, the different holofields. You could only have specific armor fields per army, so I couldn't have the same character. I couldn't have one character. I couldn't have a character with a C field and then another character also with a conversion field. You had to have a conversion field on one guy and a refractor field on the other and stuff like that. It was basically unique stuff. That's why it was nice to have a conversion field, which was a 4-up, and then a Rosarius, which was also a 4-up, because it contained a conversion field, but that was a workaround. You had to do that. All the different Wargear, Camila line. This was basically a camouflage suit. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word. So it's pretty cool. All the different stuff you can use. Blind grenades, if you didn't have eye protection, which was in your unit entry, could actually kill you. And same deal with like gas grenades. If you had a ventilator, that was a Wargear thing that you could have. So the game was a lot more complicated. Some say it was more fun. I say it was definitely more complicated. I had a good time playing it though, so I'm not saying it wasn't fun. Just a lot of things going on. But all of that fluff and rules from the Wargear book kept me entertained for hours just reading through that. So last but not least, we have the Codex Imperialis. So let me grab that and we'll dive through that one pretty quickly because I know this was already running about 30 minutes. So these 3 books came in the original box set. This is the last book I'm going through, which was the Codex Imperialis, and I'm going to fly through this one. Basically, this was the book that if you wanted to build an army and you didn't have a codex specifically, you could build it using just this book. And it covered some more of the background of the galaxy, the Imperium. Talked about the Space Marine chapters, how they were arranged, all their points, Imperial Guard, Inquisition, Adeptus Astartes, which those are the judges and arbitrators, Adeptus Astra Telepathica, that's your Psychers, Adeptus Ministorum, this is your subset of the Adeptus Astra, or sorry, the Ministorum, these are the religious guys, so your Sisters of Battle, stuff like that, Adeptus Mechanicus, Titans, Assassins, Administratum, all that stuff. Then we get into the Orcs, Eldar, Squats, Chaos, and Tyranid lists. So I'm going to fly through this pretty quick. There's the galactic map. That's changed and gotten color over the years. They were getting straight to the Imperium, how the Imperium is structured, starting with the Emperor and the High Lords of Terra all the way down. You can see where they all fall and kind of work together. So we have the Adeptus Terra, and then how that all worked out, and you had all the different offices, who they reported to. Adeptus Astartes, Space Marine chapters, kind of flowed through the Inquisition line here, so they reported up that way, and through the Adeptus Administratum, so how that all worked together. So, and that's changed. They've kind of become their own wing now, and not a part. I mean, they are a part of the Imperium, but you know what I'm talking about. They don't report to those guys as much anymore. High Lords of Terra, who they are, Space Marine origins, all that stuff, all the special rules for Marines, just all of the physique of a Space Marine. You want to talk about a crazy article? They took this article and they ran a series in White Dwarf, which I wish they would reprint, but it talked about all of the different, how a Space Marine becomes a Space Marine, how it's a huge process. They take a kid who's basically around the age of 10 or 12, and they start this whole 20-year process almost of implanting gene seeds and secondary hearts and all that stuff. And then eventually the Space Marine is born. Talks about the different Space Marines and their Primarchs. And then we get into the Space Marine rules. I'm sorry, they does not have points. My bad, I forgot. This one doesn't have the points, but it has unit explanations for everything that was in the codexes later on with points. So, that's the crazy thing. Has all of the different Hungarians, Rough Riders, Halfling Snipers. Those guys, if you ever wonder, they've been around since forever. This book is interesting because it doesn't have points, but it has all the unit entries just short of points. And let me just make sure there's all the different stuff. Grey Knights, right here, the Inquisitors, how they function and stuff like that. They basically took all of these things and made codexes out of them, and just full-on armies. The Adeptus Ministorum, Adeptus Sororitas. There we go. There's Sisters of Battle there. How that all worked. Adeptus Mechanicus and their quest for knowledge, and the Titan Legions. They did have rules for Tech Priests and their special rules. So you almost need this book too, just for the special rules of how they all worked. And again, no points. No points. You just kind of played with whatever until the Codex came out. And then with actual points. Get into the Orcs, all the different Orc clans. This book was just a basic overview of everything that was in the game. That if you had any questions, or even if you didn't have the codexes, you could at least read up on your opponent's stuff too, and get familiar with their rules and all the different things. So, Eldar, I know I'm not stopping to read any of the entries here, but you kind of get the gist of it. It's pretty good stuff. Eldar Scouts, Guardians, it's cool stuff. More background fluff. The Squats. This is one of the last unit entries for the Squats. Now they all work together. Oh man, sorry Squat players, but they did have special rules. They hated Orcs. They could repair stuff with a Guildmaster Engineer guy, Ancestor Lords, strategy rating and all that stuff. And then we get into Chaos and all those special rules for Chaos. Bloodthirster. This is basically the Khorne section. Then we have the Slanesh section with the crazy cow bull beast with the exposed boob and stuff like that. Fiends of Slanesh, which were these crazy alien things that look like Tyranids but weren't quite Tyranids. Daemonettes. Great Unclean One. This is all Nurgle, obviously. And then the Lord of Change himself. And then we have the Greater Demons of Tzeentch and all those crazy guys. We get into the Chaos Space Marines. We also had Beastmen that were in the game. So you could totally use Beastmen. Then we get the Tyranids and their craziness, which basically consisted of Tyranids, Scene Stealers, the Patriarch Magus. You had Warriors and Termagants. There's no Hive Tyrant. There's no... pretty much Hormagaunt, Termagant. We're just Termagants. Yeah, that was pretty much it. So, we did have Carnifexes. There's the Hive Tyrant. I was wondering where I was like, there's no Hive Tyrant. There's the Hive Tyrant. There's no Hive Tyrant model, though. Yet. Keyword is yet. Later on that came out. So, then we have those guys. So, whew, blew through that one pretty quick. I know I missed some stuff. But that was the entire background for the playable factions that were in the game. You notice we didn't have Dark Eldar. Who else is missing? We have enough to go off of demons and stuff like that. Even the Adeptus Mechanicus had units. It wasn't a full list or anything like that, but it was enough to touch on most of the playable races in 40k. Tau didn't exist yet. Yeah, pretty good stuff. But that was a whirlwind of information that I just dumped on you guys, going through the nostalgia train with me. Yeah, Warhammer 2nd edition. The only thing I need now is all the codexes, which we have, so I can play 2nd. You know, it's not like magically my book's caught on fire and I can't use them anymore. So they're still there. Anyway, this is AdamHarry from BoLS. Woo! Thanks for watching. Have a good one. AdamHarry signing off.